everyone, and welcome to the Truth and Data Podcast. I'm Jessica,
I'm Kim.
And I'm Debbie.
and today we're going to be talking about expert witness testimony. As an instructor at George Mason University, when I'm talking to students, this is always the thing that they're most apprehensive and nervous about. They're like, "What's it like to testify? Is that something you have to do in all roles?" And so I think we can have a really good conversation here today about that. Um, I will say, as someone I've been in roles where there is no expectation of testimony, even though we're doing forensics work to support court, because remember, the definition of forensics is to support court, and in roles where testimony is expected, and both can exist. So, we'll start off. I'm going to throw it to Debbie and go like, the biggest thing is people are nervous about it. So, what's your biggest
Absolutely.
piece of advice for that?
I prepare.
Prepare.
Preparation, even whether you're presenting, at a conference or testifying in trial. I know for me and the people that I've worked with over the years, preparation makes you that much more comfortable. It's not going to get rid of all the jitters, but preparation, knowing the material, know, in the case of court, hopefully the prosecutor or whoever you are working for will work with you to prepare. But I think studying, it's just like, if you want to equate it to a test or like I said, a conference presentation or testifying in court, preparation and knowing the material, knowing the information and the data, I think that's for me that helps immensely. And this isn't just digital forensic examiners, that is what we're talking about today. But anyone, I work with non-sworn, investigators, and the same thing. They felt the same thing. One of the discrepancies, though, is a lot of times, I know for us in training, we received training on how to testify in court,
Right.
whereas the digital forensic examiners that worked for me didn't. We
But they still are.
implemented
They still
that.
have to do it,
Yes,
right?
yes, absolutely. We ended up implementing that, but I don't think that's the case everywhere.
Well, you actually brought up a question that it maybe should have been the first question I asked. So I'll throw this out to either of you. What's the difference between, we specifically said we're talking about expert witness testimony, and maybe we need to get to the basic of explaining what's the difference between expert witness testimony as
Yes,
an expert witness and just being a fact witness.
correct.
So what I've learned is that it depends on your jurisdiction. Now,
Yes,
typically, oftentimes they will, many courts will go by some regulation or some standards that basically says if you're going to give an opinion, then that makes you an
exactly.
expert. However, then there are some courts and jurisdictions who feel as though that just because the judge says you're an expert, you're an expert. And so it kind of, as we love to say, it depends. But I'll, yeah, I'll leave that one at that.
That
No,
makes sense.
but that's a really good point because I've definitely been in courts where you are a fact witness until you're asked an expert question and it's not overruled for you to give an opinion. So the moment you give an opinion is when you become the expert witness. And I've been and in some courts they qualify you as an expert witness in voir dire, not actually during your testimony. So sometimes it's beforehand,
Mhm.
and that's part of. I would say one of the most important things. This is going to sound silly, but Debbie's talking about preparation. I will tell you one of the most important things is to maintain an up-to-date CV. Your
Mhm.
curriculum vitae is what is
Mhm.
submitted to the court to allow you to testify to the knowledge you have. And so it needs to be updated with your other court testimonies, with your education, with any trainings you've taken, with your actual job functions. And I'll tell you that I, once a month, take about 10 minutes to update my CV, if not twice a month, because that is a living document. And I hate to say this comment, but if you're not learning something or doing something new, you're missing out. And you really should be learning something new a new tool, a new method, a new course, something within doing a new task within a month's period that can, the update to your resume can be 2 words, right? It doesn't have to be significant, but you should be doing something once a month that's worthy of updating.
I want to go back and just mention what you said at the very beginning of sometimes you'll have cases where they'll say, oh, you're not going to testify, or oh, hey, this
Yep.
one's definitely going to court. And that can change on a dime either way.
Yep.
So you can't really bank on that it's not going to court because it can end up in court before you ever know what happened. And it may not even go, quote, to trial, but you
Right.
may still end up needing to do, various testimonies, attend various hearings, and then also after a trial's over, you may end up as has happened a couple of times where we've had to go back, or I've had to go back and to actually end up testifying at a sentencing hearing, and they've
Mm.
had to pretty much put the brakes on and say, we've already tried this case, let's stop with this.
So
So
that's a really,
yeah.
really good point about other types of hearings because, I've testified in Daubert hearings, and there are lots of other testimony doesn't mean trial. Testimony, you could be, we'll say testimony and deposition are both in the same category, anything where you're presenting to the court. But let's go to the real basic, which is the definition of digital forensics. The term forensics implies that our analysis is for the intention of court, regardless of if your particular case goes to court. It's the potentiality. It's the reason we have to maintain chain of custody logs, and we have to ensure we have good notes, and that we have to ensure that we prepare and that we're doing testing in accordance with proper procedures and that we're following our SOPs. That's all because everything is for the potentiality of court, and we need to prevent spoliation of evidence. If it's not evidence and you're not doing it for court and you're doing it more to protect an organization, internal investigations, that's not digital forensics. It may be incident response, it may be, but if it's potentially can go to court, even if it's the slightest potential. So internal HR investigations could potentially go to court. So you have to treat it as forensics. But if it's just to get a system online, you might not be doing that, and it might be more of an incident response thing. And I think people forget that we're two different purposes between IR and DF. So IR, you don't have an expectation of court, and not that that means you can take shortcuts. It means that you don't have to worry about the particular element of court. But there are lots of people who have been forensics examiners for countless numbers of years and never testified because depending on the type of casework you work on and the type of organization you're in, you may be doing things that go to court, but you might not be in a position to testify. When I was in the intelligence community, very, very common. We typically would not testify to the forensic work we're doing. Not that those things wouldn't necessarily go to court. We had to treat them as if we would. But because it was an intelligence operation, it was less likely to go to court.
But what makes this, it's a two-word phrase that we abide by, right? It's forensic science, so
Yes.
it is science that we are, in scientific methods that we are applying to this, but it is from a forensic perspective, or has that flavor that goes along hand in hand with that. So you for us, we can't have one without the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're 100% right, right? And the thing is you also have to know, we're I'm gonna ask you the basic question. Can you just clearly define the difference between a fact and an expert witness?
I feel as though a fact witness is that you are speaking to the facts of the data. You are speaking to, here is exactly how this occurred, or here's what the data is, and you have a report, and that is oftentimes your basis for what you end up
Hmm.
testifying to. So I think that is where people don't pay good enough attention to their reports, because that's going to be your very first introduction to your testimony.
Kim, that's really interesting because in my head, I always thought of the fact witness not as what the data is, but what you did. So you're testifying to the facts of what you did. So I received this on this date. I did this. I ran this tool. This was the result. So it's more of like your processes and procedures and like your
Yes.
exact. But I get what you're saying. I feel like anytime you go into interpretive meaning, how you interpret it at that point, not the tool, right? So you can say
Hmm.
the result of the tool was this,
Sure.
that's what you did. But the second you apply meaning, the second you're saying this is consistent with, this is, I tested this and it was this, this means this. The
Correct.
second you
Yeah.
apply meaning, there you're giving your opinion.
So are you talking about putting it in context? So this is the data, those are the facts. This is the data that I found. This is what I did. These are the facts. But this is what it means. Like this is the context
Mm-hmm.
in
Right.
which it matters to the case.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes me, I listen to say digital forensic examiners, testifying in court, and they're listing all of this data that they found, but then it has to be explained, like, why is that even important?
Right. And
Right.
that's usually
Right.
where you're being asked for your opinion, is in
Okay.
the
And that's
what
the
does
Sure.
this mean? And I feel like there's almost a rhythm. Like they always start with your name. I am going to tell you something. Every time they ask me my name and how to spell it, that is when I'm nervous. Like there are so many butterflies in my stomach, and I literally think that I'm going to misspell my name because I have all of this like pressure. There's a lot of moment. And I'll tell you, you spoke about studying. I think the most intense part is I feel like it's a memorization
Yeah.
process. Like I have to memorize the facts of the case that day for the stand, whereas normally I would just refer to my report and my notes. But when you're on the stand, you want to seem fluent. So you need to memorize the facts of the case. And I think that that's a really, really big difference. All right, so let's say we're talking about opinion. And, there's this concept of us staying within our expertise. What do you do when you're asked a question, and maybe you could give a sample that is outside of your area of expertise? Because it definitely happens.
You may be asked a question. It's not necessarily outside your area of expertise. It's outside the area of the examination and what you
Yep.
were asked to do. So in that instance, then I don't know is perfectly fine. And I don't know is there is not a problem in the world of not knowing. And then leave it at that. And then if they need to ask or want to ask you more or start to dig deeper into why you don't know, you can go down that road to explain. I had a request for this. This is what I did. And that was not part of it. So you can easily explain that. And then even, depending on your jurisdiction, they may say, that may be a big deal. They may skip over it. They may go right on.
Yeah, I've you can also say that was outside the scope of my investigation, which is something I've had to do many times because a lot of times, we have to stick within our scopes, we have to stick within our ethical boundaries. I do know of cases where digital forensics examiners have, especially with health data, are being asked to make assertions about heart rates. And that is not our area of expertise,
Wow.
right? So, they'll be like, well, what do you think about that in terms of elevated heart rates? I'm just presenting the facts. My response to that is usually, I'm not a medical professional, right? Like that is outside of my area of expertise. And answering that is outside of my scope, that's outside of my expertise, or even I don't know is completely okay. Like, don't be afraid to say you don't know something. It is totally okay. They may, I've never had this happen to me, but I know some examiners who have had this. They may ask you to go back and look at that thing.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Don't you think that gives you more credibility though?
I do. I think
Mhm.
it shows that you're within your scope, that you're within your area of expertise, that you're speaking to the things you know. I do think that
And you're
that's
not willing to surmise or make something up just to answer the question.
right. Right now, usually for whichever side you're supporting, you would hope that you have talked about any assertions they're going to request of you prior to trial, because a lot of times you're speaking fact, 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 and then there is a summation statement of, so can you say that this means this? Or something to that effect. I can't even think of a good one off the top of my head, but I feel like the end is always, it feels like it's a summation statement. And a lot of times you have to work so that it's a summation statement that actually is correct. I would say that we have a responsibility when engaging with attorneys to ensure that they understand that they may really want to demonstrate something, but our evidence might be less than that demonstration. And we need to make sure, well, I wouldn't word it that way. That's actually a little too strong. I can't say it to that precision. And you want to do that and hash that out before trial. That's not what
before.
you want to hash out on a stand. So communication with your counsel beforehand is really critical. I mean, that's who we work for typically as counsel, or who we're working with. So, what is your advice for communicating with counsel effectively?
Go ahead, Kim.
I think it's, well, obviously without that, things aren't going to go as well for you or for the case on the stand if you don't communicate well. And so that's going to be our first, and I think this kind of ties back to what I was going to say a moment ago, is that your um, your written report is oftentimes the very first communication or
Yep.
first thing or first point of testimony that they see. And that written report oftentimes is going to have your basics on it, your facts, right? So they've gotten that, and then you're going to go over that on the stand oftentimes, right? You're going to go over all of those facts, and then you're going to get down to the data where, okay, hey, now we've arrived at this point, and it may be plenty enough for you to just say, I did all of these things, and here we are. And you don't have to say or do or interpret or be that expert or give an opinion, right?
100%.
You
Yep.
can get to that point where you're done. It's just the fact that it's there. You don't have to talk about how you translated the date time. You don't have to talk about, is it UTC, is it Eastern time? You don't have to say all those things. So there's, but where I was going with this is that that's oftentimes your first communication, and that may be the first thing that they know about you. So paying attention to what you put in that written report is going to be huge, and writing it so that they're able to understand it. But I'll also say, you also mentioned going along with your SOPs and your policies. And some agencies and sub laboratories have policies about what you do put in those and about what you don't.
Right.
And some of them have it for a blanket, like across an entire agency, that's not necessarily tailored toward what we would need to say in a forensic report.
Right.
So that is when it's even more important for you to be able to, many times, if you are the examiner and not an examiner slash investigator who's doing the discussion with the attorney or
Yep.
in the law enforcement world, then you need to make sure that the investigator understands. So you're almost playing this game of telephone at the beginning. So you're going to have to make sure that the investigator understands what it is that you're trying to convey as well, so that they can explain to the prosecutor or to the attorney.
You
So
make
that's
a good point. Yeah, that everyone has to be sort of on the same page about what the data says. Have you ever had, or have you ever had a prosecutor who did not, say, have the time to adequately sit down with you and prepare? Because I feel like that occurred. I see both of you shaking your heads. And what would you suggest in those circumstances?
I will press for a prep session.
I think that's the right
I
answer.
have
Yeah,
had occasions
absolutely.
where my prep session was day of, but I made sure that it was 2 hours before court. Like if I will press and press and press to get a prep session. A lot of attorneys, depending on their roles, are extraordinarily busy. I've worked with attorneys who are very big on prep; they're very pro, and I've worked with attorneys where I have to really request. But it is better for the outcome to have that prep session, even if it's day of. But the earlier the better. The closer to when you wrote your report. Um,
I feel like I want people to understand that they should feel as though they have the authority to ask for those
Yes,
prep
push
sessions.
for a prep session,
Yes.
100%. You and I feel like something that came from me with time, that I didn't initially realize that I could request that. So it's a really good point. So if you're listening to this and you're not getting that time with whomever is the attorney whom's you're presenting on their behalf, ask for the prep session. Ask for the prep session. Ask for the prep session.
And it's totally okay for you to to even explain when you're asking for that, to say the way my testimony or I anticipate you asking me is not good enough for this. I can't guess what you are going to ask me. So far I've prepped guessing what you're going to ask me. I'm not in your mind. So
Right.
I need you to tell me what you're going to ask me. We need to talk these things through, and we need to talk about the terminology, because you may be asking me a question that I can't answer, and I want to be able to answer all your questions.
I have I have had occasion where the terminology is a big issue. To be honest, I usually prep that with the side that's hired me, but it's hard on cross. And I know we haven't even addressed the concept of cross yet because we're talking about prep. Prepping for cross is very different. On cross, it's sometimes awkward because I've had many occasions where the phraseology that's used is so incorrect that there's no way to answer the question because the term is being used ambiguously. I will say I have agreed to define a term on the stance. In other words, this is going to sound weird. Cross has asked me a question, and the terminology wasn't correct. They were using a term that actually means something that's much broader, but we were speaking about something specific. And I said, in the context of this question, can we clarify that this term means this in the context of this question? And done that too, because what has happened and what I've seen happen is they'll try to use the broader term to get agreement with you speaking about a niche incident and then try to apply it to the broader. And so I'm always clear in my answer to say, can we agree, before I respond, can we agree that this means this in this context? And someone, a really, really good examiner who I really respect, once told me, when you're up there, it's your box. You control the pace, not the attorney. So if they're going too fast, slow down. It's your pace. As well as, because they will try to speed you up, as well as this really big thing about if you're asked a question that doesn't make sense, ask for clarification. Can you please restate the question? I've had attorneys refuse to restate the question. They're like, no, it's clear. And so then usually what I'll do is I'll go, do you mean this?
Oh.
And this is always about terminology, right? Like I feel like this problem isn't about the facts. The facts are the facts. It's about the fact that the attorney is using a terminology that if we're being very technical and in agreement with our science, that it's an inappropriate term or not a term of art. And we do need to clarify those things. So I think you brought up something really keen, Kim, on definitions and terminology and going over it ahead of time. But the thing is don't be afraid to ask those questions on cross back to make sure that the terms are clear because they will twist it.
Sure.
That's and that's
Intentionally.
intentionally, and you don't know
Oh
if
yeah.
it's intentional or if it's that
You,
they don't know the
or they don't
terminology,
know.
and it can
I
Right.
be
actually
either.
worked I actually was working with a prosecutor one time. We were in a prep session, thank goodness. And so we were talking about some questions he was going to ask me. And we went through several, and he had great questions. And then we got to one, and I said, we're going to need to rephrase this question. Let's put it this way. So after about three of those that I had to say, let's reword these questions, he finally said, I hate you forensic people. You forensic people are so I forget the word they used, but it was something about, you have these lines that you can't cross. And I was like,
Yes,
that is why I'm a
Of
forensic
course.
person. That is
that's why
why
I'm a
I am
That's a
here on
scientist.
behalf
crazy
of the court.
thing. That's a crazy thing for a
But
prosecutor.
but
Yes.
we're
I hate you
scientists.
forensic people.
We're
Yeah.
scientists, right? So we have boundaries and we have to speak clearly. We have to, yeah, I 100% agree with that.
So I'll
So
make
go
a
ahead, please.
point, just a really quick point, sort of maybe to wrap up this part. But one other thing is, obviously, we can request, an expert witness can request prep for the purpose of asking the prosecutor or like being informed about what they're going to ask. But you bring up a good point, Kim, in that you may have to explain to them what they need to ask, because not every prosecutor is super technical, and some of them may not understand the data or may not even understand what's important themselves. They may a little bit, but you as a forensic scientist, as a digital forensic examiner, an expert witness, may need to tell them, hey, these are the points, that these are some of the points we need to try to get across, and these are the questions that may elicit those answers from me.
I'll say that's
Mhm.
easier in some contexts than others. I've worked some cases where I have full knowledge about everything going on in the case, and I can very easily articulate, here are some questions that make sense to ask me in this order, and I'll draft them. But I've worked other cases where either because of need to know in the intelligence community or because of sequestration that I did not have access to the other details of the
Right, that makes
case.
sense.
So in those instances, it's really, really hard to derive what is important because sometimes I don't know why I'm being asked to look at a specific thing. So, depending on the context of how much information you have, affects your ability to do that. And, it's twofold because I do really. And I've been in both situations, and bias is an important thing to recognize from a scientific perspective. And we need to, if you look at the guidelines from the NIST Foundation's paper on digital forensics. There's really, really good guidelines there about removing bias from testing, et cetera. And in a lot of instances, when we testify, we've conducted testing. It is really, really hard to not have bias when you have all of the facts of the case that are coming from whichever perspective you're working for. However, when you have no facts, it's really, really hard to know what is important. And I've
That makes
worked
sense.
both situations, and I see pluses and minuses. So, of course, when I'm completely sequestered or I have no need to know about the case details, um, you know, I have no bias and I'm just looking at the raw data and reporting it. But sometimes you just don't know something was important,
Yeah.
and when you don't have that, and sometimes you miss things. And because I've worked cases both ways, that's really interesting. And sometimes when you've had a case where you've had no knowledge, you've worked it, and then you find out the knowledge after the case because that's when you're allowed access to it. And then you're like, ugh, I didn't. I saw a blank and blank, but I had no idea that was relevant because no one thought that that would be within the area of the scope. I know I'm being very vague. I have to be,
Yeah.
and nobody knew it was inside the area of the scope when they assigned it to me because they didn't have any anticipation that I would have access to information pertaining to that, right? Like that would have occurred in that time period or that app or whatever the scope is. So sometimes it's hard because of what you don't know. But I guess that even goes to the forensics concept when when we're doing analysis, you don't know what you don't know, and that can be contextual as well.
Sure. I think there's so much that begins before you ever testify,
Hmm.
right?
Oh, for
I
sure.
mean, and it doesn't truly matter if you testify or not because that's not going to make a difference in how you do anything. Um,
100%. Your testifying or not, does not should never affect your process. Yeah.
no, and that is why I think the more examinations that you do, the more if you're new, just starting out or anything, and you're nervous about testifying, just even the more exams that you do, the more comfortable you are with the processes that you're doing, with exactly how it's almost you know uh, um, things that are definite that you do in every case, right? So then you're able to explain those easier because you do those every time. And so the more that you do it, the more that you're going to be comfortable with it, the more that you're going to be able to explain it. And the other thing is, we talk about communication all the time, but there's several different things that you just brought up here. One is, if you're in a laboratory where someone's bringing you evidence and they say, hey, here's my request, that's all well and good. You're giving me a request, but did they have time to make a copy of their case file and hand it to me to let me know all the background of things so that I can see what I'm really looking for here? Did they write a good synopsis here on the request of what I need to actually look for? Or is it very specific where they really do only need me to find a deleted file? Do they
Right.
just need this? So that communication starts at the very beginning of your examination. And then it goes on through, and I'll tell you, even throughout your examination,
Yes.
just in things in terms of if you found something that you're like, might want to let them know about that, then you do need that communication with whoever the requester is. And you do need to have those conversations. And then you also You need to be able to communicate with people that work in your laboratory. If
Yes.
you cannot communicate with the people in your laboratory, I always say, if you aren't willing to come to work every day and learn something new and share that with your coworkers of what you learn new, you are not going to last very long within this field because you have to depend on everybody. You can't know everything.
No,
But
no way.
if you're able to have that good communication, I'm telling you that helps you to be able to explain things well later down the road.
But and that's the crux of it. What is testifying at the basis? It is explaining, right? Our entire role is we have this technical job, but what we put forward is communication. Your technical report is your communication to the court. The court reads your report. The other side reads your report. Your report gets introduced into evidence. That is part of your testimony, right? Then you communicate with your attorney, right? You may even communicate with opposing counsel. I've communicated with opposing counsel before. Then, right, so you're with your investigator in your lab, then your report's a communication. Then, and in all these instances, you're explaining to other people what your work is and what the data shows. Then you have to share it with the trier of fact, be it judge, jury, what a hearing, whatever the situation is. Your job is now to explain it to the trier of fact. So now our role is to explain extraordinarily technical nuance of things that are left behind, footprints from actions people take on computer systems. Kim, how do you effectively explain
This is my
highly technical topics to
this is my
the
favorite
trier of
part. I love
fact?
listening to y'all's analogies.
Yes, use analogies. Look, you are the teacher. You are the teacher to the investigator, to the prosecutor, to the court, to the jury. You are the teacher, and in order to be an effective teacher, you have to be able to explain it on ways that people can understand. And trust me, I've never sat in a or been in a trial where I've actually had somebody that was an examiner that was in the jury box. So, I need to be able to explain to them. But guess what? I have been there, trying to explain to this jury. I've been there trying to explain these exceptionally technical concepts on a very low level.
Right.
There you can take things down to a very, and I don't mean low as in, I just mean I don't expect these people to know that, right? They're not going
100%.
to.
That's not their job.
No,
That's why we're
no,
there.
very few people have this job. So that's our job is to educate them. And it takes a lot for people to learn a new concept. So you have to take it to a level that of something that they already know about. So
Mm-hmm.
it might be an analogy that has something to do with something they do every day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, don't try to don't force an analogy though
Don't force
whenever
an
it's not
analogy.
needed.
Absolutely.
But
Sometimes it's easier just to explain it. Yeah.
But definitely, I mean, that is one of the only ways that you're going to have them go, oh, I get it. Oh, I see why they can't say this, or oh, I see why they actually say this. Or, you may be explaining something as to why you can't explain something. You may be
Mm-hmm.
explaining, what encryption is, so that way they understand why. No, it wasn't my fault here that I couldn't get to this. There was actually something that was going on here.
So,
So
yeah, and
there may
there's
be
things you need to be prepared that you're going to be asked. You're going to be asked what is a hash value. You're going
every
to be
time.
asked what is an algorithm. You're going to I don't think you can go to court and not be asked what a hash value is because you're going to say the hash is matched and then they're going to go what's a hash? Can you explain to the court what a hash value is? So things that are very commonplace to us. I'm going to say I think the best preparation, Debbie, and I maybe you'll appreciate this. I think the best preparation for being able to testify is teaching. And so
Yeah.
I would suggest that everyone, because I would say I've learned a lot as an educator. I've been teaching
Hmm.
digital forensics. I know Kim teaches at a university. I teach at a university. Obviously, we teach at that's a big function of what our organization Hexordia does. We teach a lot of classes, and being able to break down concepts to teach them to somebody who's never done it. When I teach, obviously, it's a lot more in depth, and we're doing labs and hands-on exercise. I can't do that with the jury, but but you do come up with analogies and you do learn how to make things relatable and you see it on their faces and you know when people are getting things. And this is a weird thing. One of the most important things I feel like when you testify is to look at the trier of fact when you're answering questions. You get asked the question by the attorney, so natural reaction is to respond to the attorney. Now, the best thing about the fact that when you speak, that you're, unless you're clarifying, I don't look at the jury when I'm saying, can you rephrase that? But the second that I'm giving the answer, I look to the trier of fact, be it the judge or the jury. And the reason is I can read their face. I can see if they're getting the way I'm demonstrating something. And if they're not, I need to be able to, on the fly, explain it another way or make sure I'm getting clarification. And the only reason I can read the faces of the jury is because I'm used to reading the faces of students. So I
Right.
know when what I'm saying is syncing and connecting and when it's really not connecting with the person. And that's our job, is to connect this, the data we're explaining, to the person so they can comprehend it in the concept, and within the context of whatever they're reviewing. Um, so
So I'll go
it's
ahead
important.
and just piggyback on that because
Please.
yes, I do feel like that, teaching does definitely help because we're trying to teach them a new concept. They can't possibly know what we know. Uh, you're not expected to. So the other thing is that if we are saying that teaching is a good idea, you in order to be able to prepare for testimony, you don't have to be a quote teacher or an
Correct.
instructor.
Yep.
Start out, start out explaining to your mother or your grandma what you do.
I
Yes.
I have
Or your
done
Start
that
out doing seminars.
supervisor, your non-technical supervisor.
100%. I've tested analogies on my mother.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I have 100% said to my mother, I'm like, I can't tell you what this is about, but tell me if this makes sense to you. And, testing it on people from I hate to say this, from a less technical generation,
Mhm.
is actually a good way to figure out if your analogy hits. Another good thing is don't think that teaching means you have to be hired to teach at an organization or for a company or at a school. Teaching can be as simple as, I worked in a lab where every single week everybody had to share something they had learned new that week because we learned something. That can be your introduction to sharing, can be to your team, to the people you work with. It could be you giving a presentation. Presentations are teaching. You giving
Mhm.
a presentation on something that occurred in a case, you have a case study, whatever. Being able to present on that will prepare you for testimony. You don't know what questions are coming. It's not nearly as dicey as cross can be. Um, I also would say, can I throw something back to redirect? Oh my gosh, I don't
Sure.
know why I'm saying we didn't talk about redirect and recross, but there's not just direct examination and cross examination in the courtroom. There is an opportunity for redirect and recross, and I think it is good to prepare um, whoever you are working for the opportunity to do redirect. And what I mean by that is if there is a question that you can answer yes or no to, they need to be knowledgeable enough as to if they should ask you a follow up, which
Mhm.
means they really need to understand things that are outside of the bounds of just what you prepped with them. When you prep, it's important to think about what would cross ask and how can we clarify it on redirect, because sometimes a question is intentionally vague or phrased in a way where you have to answer it, but you don't get the opportunity to clarify, because on redirect, I mean on cross, you may not be able to speak as freely because you may be answered that's a yes or no question. So
Yeah.
it's good to be able um, to have communicated, and for the the attorney who you're working with to understand the details of your examination well enough to know to redirect you. It's not like you get to talk to them and ask them to ask you a question like, ask me about that.
Right.
Um,
Well,
That
the
goes
other
back to
thing,
preparation, your
sure.
preparation meeting.
Yeah.
right.
Here's
That's what I'm
another
saying.
thing
Yeah,
I'll
it's the
throw out.
preparation meeting.
I'll throw out this is the fact that we most likely, if you're an examiner, you more than likely are not an attorney. So
Hashtag no.
so there are probably and there are lots of rules that go along with these trials, right? We just like they can't know what we know, we can't know what they know.
Absolutely.
So when something seems like it's a miss or it's odd or whatever, you've got to depend on whomever hired you or whoever, whatever behalf that you're sitting there. You got to depend on them to take up and to do whatever it is that needs to happen. This is not your place, really. I mean,
No.
to do anything other than ask the questions that you're answer the questions you're asked. So funny story. I got to tell you this one because this is one of my all-time favorites. Not in a good way. I don't. Well, I mean, it was funny, so you kind of got to go with the
It's
funny
funny
thing then,
now.
right? It's funny now. It was funny to me, but I couldn't laugh on the stand. So I had an attorney who was cross-examining me, and so I was a civilian computer forensic examiner, right? And so this individual had it in his head somehow that I was a sworn officer. And so he asked me, about my training. He dug deeper into training, just looking for something, whatever
Hmm.
it was. And I tell him all of this, and he was like, "Well, you left out the part where you went to the academy." I was like,
Because
"Hmm,
I didn't.
you left out the part that you carry a badge and gun to work every day." I was like, "I didn't leave that part out. You mean to tell me that you're not a sworn?" No, sir. And he argued with me. I'm
Wow.
thinking, I mean, argued, and the prosecutor let
I
him
thought
go
you were
because I guess
lying.
he just, yeah, the prosecutor let him go, and I'm like, what the heck? They're like, yes, you are. How many people have you arrested? You're not going to tell us about that? I'm like, zero. And I mean, it was to me,
Bec-
it was a
Just
little
because of
little
the agency
crazy.
that you worked for, he assumed that you were a
Either
sworn.
he assumed or he was just trying to fluster me, and I was just sitting there looking at him like, just answering questions here, buddy. That's all I can do for you.
You brought up something, you brought up not laughing. Can I give you a technique that I learned
Oh
from
God.
my recruiter into the Marine Corps when I was going to boot camp? When he was driving me to MEPS to go do my military, and that's military entrance processing. Um, when I was driving to MEPS to go ship off to boot camp in 2001, he said to me in the car, he said, "You can't laugh. You can't show any expression on your face. If you think you have to laugh, bite the insides of your cheeks." And I will tell you, I do it on the stand to have a neutral expression. So when they're saying something, because sometimes things come out that are just like, what the? What I do is sometimes I show my facial expressions because sometimes it's relevant
I
for.
don't have a poker face at
Yeah, yeah,
all,
yeah.
so that
But
would be
that's what I'm saying.
difficult
I
for
don't
me.
have a poker face. Like everything shows on my face. So when I really need to, like if it's something where I think I'm gonna laugh, I bite the inside of my cheeks. You can't laugh while biting the inside of your cheeks. Or I know you're both trying it right now because it's like natural to try it while I'm
Just
saying it.
makes my face look thinner. I'm gonna do that
Right.
all the time.
I can't
Um,
do that.
But it really does work. It's a weird tip. I'd say the other weird tip. So that was actually never given to me in the setting of court. I just apply it there. The other the other very good tip is a very good examiner um, suggested to me. The most important thing is like you want to give a pause. You were bringing up that it's the responsibility of the lawyer to do the lawyer thing, which means it's their responsibility to object. It's their responsibility to deal with whatever the courtroom legal stuff is that I am not knowledgeable on. But we have to give them the opportunity to do that. So what I was always taught is look at the attorney who's asking you the question, look at the opposing attorney, regardless of if it's yours or the other side. Just look to that table to so that you don't start speaking if there's going to be an objection, which I've absolutely done in my career. I've absolutely started speaking and then they started said objection, and so I've had to learn and really work on slowing that response down because sometimes, well, I know the answer. It's the work I did. And you're just saying what you did, right? So it's something which is why people should be comfortable with it. Nerves are okay. It means you care. But so the rhythm is you look at the person asking a question, you look to the other table for a split second, just see if they're going to object, and then you look at the trier of fact. And if you do that, you'll naturally give the pause that you need to if you actually take the moment to look. Because for me, the pausing's hard. So that's the reason I look.
Well, and you say pausing. Here's the other thing. Wait to make sure that they're done with the question, because attorney on whichever side, they may be particularly nervous about asking you about technical questions and so they may ask you these run-on questions that I call them, and they just continue on. And then, usually if they ask you three questions in one, then you know what, you can say, which question would you like me to answer? And so, but you need to wait and not talk over top of them. So that pausing is exceptionally important because you want to make sure that whatever or whenever you speak, that one, you're answering what the question is, and two, also that they're not going to speak and that the jury can hear your answer, so you're not talking over top of one another and the court reporter can get it all.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's really important for the court reporter. I will tell you, I was in court once, and I used a very technical, hard to spell term. And a fun fact: I went to court reporting school when I was in the Marine Corps, so I feel like people don't know that about me.
How
Very
cool is
very
that?
weird. I didn't complete because the Marine Corps actually cut their court reporting. They switched to voice writing while I was going through the school. So I went halfway through the school, and the Marine Corps switched everybody to voice writers. Um, and I did not go to voice writing school because it wasn't what was in my contract. My contract was for court reporting school, and I went to JAG over that. But that's a whole nother story. But I've been in that seat. I know how to, use the machine, and I can read steno. And so I used a really bad evil word, but it was the only approach, not bad evil like a curse, but like very technical, very hard to spell word. So I used the term and then I spelt it and I said, my apologies to the court reporter. And the judge turns around and said, how about your apologies to the court? I said, Your Honor, my apologies to the court. Because I
That's
had
pretty
just
good.
That
used
is
such a
funny.
long technical term. And I really, I was, when I went to spell, and that's the other thing, if I go to spell a term outside of my name, I usually will look to the court reporter to spell it because that's why you're spelling out the term. And any technical terms that I give that are hard to spell, uncommon, I do automatically spell them and look to the court reporter to spell them. So I will say the term to the trier of fact, and then I will look to the court reporter to spell. But I think that's because I've sat in the box, not in
I'm
trial,
sure
but
you've
just I've had the experience of
been there, done
trying to
that.
get, and I know that seeing my lips will help them. And I'm only spelling it for the record. I'm not spelling it for the trier of fact. So yeah.
One one last thing that I'll say about explaining things is that, this is for the folks who, if you're working ICAT cases, those cases are hard enough on their own. Um, you, depending on the jurisdictions that you're in and the type of case and whatever it may be, they are not going to keep a copy of whatever that image or video is, and they're going to need an explanation of that from someone.
A description.
And yes, a description of it, and they're going to need that from someone, and that may come from an investigator, but as an examiner, I've done that most every time I've been on the stand. So just as a whomever has, I mean, in that instance, a prosecutor should tell you, and they should walk you through that and explain to you and walk you through that. But that is an extra element
Mm-hmm.
of just the difficulty of it. Don't let it scare you. I mean, it's again, it's something that you need to learn and that you're going to need to do in order to, see this case through.
If you've never been to court, go to court. Go sit
Mhm.
in the galley.
Yes,
Like
yes.
that's probably the biggest piece of advice. If you've never been to court, go sit in the galley. If somebody else in your organization's testifying, watch them testify. Just go to the galley.
We would
Um,
always have new examiners go and watch both sworn investigators and digital forensic examiners testify in court multiple times.
yeah, go to the galley, see how different people testify, see how different judges handle things, and go to different, if possible, you want to definitely go to things in your jurisdiction, but different courtrooms will be set up different judges will run their courtroom differently, and it gets rid of any anticipation about that if you've never been in that environment. And in most instances, you can go and sit in the galley, which I'll go to the next thing. And I am specifically not going to give a response to this question, but I want you both to give a response to this question, which is, do you have any advice for expert witnesses who are testifying in high profile cases? Thank
I
you
mean,
for
I'm
both
not
going
no
silent.
no no. I mean, I'm trying to think if the advice would be any different than a lot of what we've already talked about. But I do think um, trying to put into words what I want to say.
I
Um,
think that if one of the big things is just knowing that if it is a high profile case that you're working on, just knowing that the potential of everything to kind of be exacerbated a bit in terms of like you are potentially going to have times that you're going to be sequestered from whatever that is. If it's depending on how profile it is, you may, there may be certain things that you can't interact with, or certain people that you can't talk to, or certain places you can't go. You're just going to have to realize that kind of everything is just on um, the way that it would normally be, but just to the 10th degree, you know.
I think in high profile cases, there's going to be a lot of emotions. There are going to be people that, for lack of a better way to put this, which I'm sure there's a better way, but they're going to make things up, or they are going to, in, I will say, in the absence of information or not understanding information, people will fill in the blanks and make things up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think being prepared for that is would be a good thing. And the other thing that I would say in a high profile case, if you are an expert witness, you are going to get praise and you are going to get criticism. And the advice would be to stay off of social media.
I would say that's the best piece of advice you could give someone is to not read the comments. Don't read the social media. You don't need it. Your mental health is more important, and that that's probably. I'm glad you said that, Debbie, because I would say that's the most important thing. I'd also say make sure you're taking care of any safety concerns. Um, you might be in a situation if it's extremely high profile where you may want to ask for a court escort. I've asked for court escorts before instead of driving my POV and parking at the court. A POV, personally owned vehicle. Sorry, that was a very Marine Corps term of me that I've never
Law
gotten rid of.
enforcement also.
I get a rental car instead of driving your personally owned vehicle, if it's something within driving distance. And I'm saying this because people don't necessarily need to know that much information about you, such as what your license plate is and what your car looks like. So I would never take my personally owned vehicle in a high profile case to court. And I would personally, yeah, like you said, not read the social media, ignore the comments. You don't need it.
And I think understanding that, or expecting
Expecting
that
it.
Mhm.
people are going to say things that they believe but that are untrue. And I think that you just can't place any value on those things
And it's not
because,
about you. It's not about
right,
you. It's about
correct.
their personal opinions about something they care about. And everybody has the right to their opinions. And, of course, if somebody says something where there's an actual concern for safety, that's the only
A
time that
threat.
you need to, a threat, yeah. And it's important to be able to distinguish the difference between people trolling and threats. And again, you shouldn't be the one to read it. It is probably important that someone's checking that there aren't threats on your
Right.
behalf. But just, safety is really important. But I love your piece of information, Debbie. Stay off social media.
I think that's important what you just said about having someone do things. It may even be checking your email for you
Yep.
just to ensure that you are abiding by, whatever that may be in
Because
case you do have some type of a email address that they can figure out or that people know.
to be
Um,
honest, it can, if the reason you need somebody else to scrub your stuff is so you don't accidentally invalidate your sequestration. Because even the title of an email could give away something about the case that you're not supposed to know. And even if you're done testifying, which is usually when you might see these things, I'm not speaking from experience. Um, I'm lying. I'm speaking from experience. I'm fibbing there. Of course, I'm speaking from experience. Yeah, you don't want to even see the titles of the email, so you may need somebody else to scrub your emails before you see them, or forward them to a new email address that no one knows, to just call that out because you don't want to inadvertently break your sequestration, which I never did. I did have somebody scrub my emails and also to check for threats, but that way threats are being checked. But I always feel bad for that person because they have to read all the evil that comes in.
well, the good thing is that they don't have to sit there and on the stand and know it
That's true.
and,
That's
and
true.
try
That's true.
to explain and have both sides of it. Not, only knowing one side of it is much easier than having to deal with it on the stand. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But yes, I just don't read your social media and take your safety seriously. Like, don't do stupid things.
And high profile cases are different in every jurisdiction. There may
Oh,
be
$100%.
a small town. A CSAM case may be a high profile case, not
100%.
necessarily to the extent that we're talking about, but it may be it may still be that they have heavy emotions on both sides, and those things can affect an expert witness's mental wellness,
And they
and make sure to take care of that.
and you've got to remember that the press may have privy to information that they may
Mm-hmm.
publish that may be highly personal. I had the town I lived in published, and
Mm-hmm.
I do not live in a big town, so that was a very
Right.
uncomfortable thing. Just knowing that it was published in a very large newspaper, my name with the town I lived in, just in a witness list. Like it wasn't, but you don't know what they're going to publish and how it may affect you. So, uh, yeah,
So
it's my
I,
piece of
I actually have a
advice.
I actually have a question. This is going to be a basic question. Kim was talking about, you know, the I taught them asking questions about her background and introducing herself, those sorts of things. And I think you had mentioned earlier, Jessica, a Dalbert hearing. So
Mm-hmm.
we did not discuss what that is. Can you guys
Mm.
can you guys sort of
Go
talk
for it,
about?
Jessica.
So these are hearings to see if evidence can be introduced, if it meets a scientific standard to be introduced in court. That's what a Daubert hearing deals with. So in those hearings, a lot of times you're talking about the details of a specific artifact, and I've had to do this multiple times, and how you tested and validated it. I've had to produce my test results to the court. I've had to produce my data to the court that I used in testing. So be aware that can happen. So you want to have that all well documented. You can. The purpose of this hearing is to talk about that particular thing. Can that
Okay.
particular item be introduced in court? So this could be, I'm just going to make something up, but this will be, are call logs scientifically sound? Do we know that that means that a call was received or sent? This is nothing that I've ever heard in a Daubert hearing. I'm purposely picking something that's very common. And so what you would be doing is explaining how you tested and validated that call logs are real, that if a number appears in there, it was either called or received, that you know how to determine that flag, how you identify if a call has been deleted. Was it, did the user remove the call from the call log, or did the system remove the call from the call log? Why was it removed from the call log? And all of that explanation goes to, can the call logs be presented in court?
So do you have to be an expert witness in order to do that? Do you have to be classified as an expert witness in order to do that?
Um, That's a really good question. I know that I'm not an attorney, so right,
Okay.
hashtag not a lawyer. I
Okay.
have been qualified as an expert in every Daubert I've done. Kim, what
Okay.
about you?
I've never had to do one.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, I guess fair.
Okay. I
But
guess I
I've,
was asking in relation to being an expert witness, because it
mm-hmm.
sounds to me like that, again, I'm not an attorney either, but that would be one of the hearings where
Yep.
you would be required to be classified as an expert
And you
witness.
do have to, that's why your CV is walked. They have to ensure that you have the knowledge and expertise in the area that you're working. There's a requirement to have had, for federally, there's a requirement to have had training in a certain specified period of time on the specific topic that you're testifying to. So, this is why, even if you work in the field, our field is always changing. It is important to continually get training to demonstrate on your CV that you've continuing your knowledge. Also, it's good to continue your knowledge. I mean, you should be getting training for
Sure.
training's sake, to continue to grow and learn more. But it is actually something that is part of you being accepted as an expert, and it is definitely something that is walked, not it as
Okay.
well in a Daubert hearing.
Okay.
They want to make sure you know what you're talking about, right? Otherwise, how can you be the
It
person
makes sense to me.
to give that opinions? But it's literally about the
Okay.
judge or a panel or whomever making a decision if something can be brought into the courtroom. Um, yeah, it's important, and it sets precedents, and It's actually, uh, I would say that there's a lot of weight to testimony. I guess we didn't talk about that. There's a lot of actual weight to testimony because you know it matters, right? You have to know you did a good job and that you're representing everything accurately because it affects people's real lives, right? There's
It
an
does.
onus to
And,
what we do.
we have those, ethical responsibilities in order to be able to, and, that is why we are doing a scientific process here. We are
Mm-hmm.
not, you may be giving your opinion, but if we give opinions, um, and that's, we could do a whole podcast on that, but really there are different ways that things may be asked of you that would be an opinion. Like, for example, are you going to testify and to say, oh yeah, this is how I've seen this occur numerous times, because you're asked on the fly?
Yeah,
Or is it going to be this is actually how this occurs and I've tested it and I have the data here that shows blah 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 blah? So there may be different, I don't want to say levels, but different, you know, degrees of what you're going to be asked or how you would need to explain those things. But you have those ethical responsibilities. I mean, that's our responsibility to be able to bring truth to the court.
absolutely. And that's why we only stay within our scope. You just mentioned explaining things. What about demonstratives? What do you have any suggestions about demonstratives?
So
And what is a demonstrative? Sorry.
uh, some kind of a visual aid. So I that's why I feel like is something to be able to display and to show to folks, and to the jury primarily is who we're speaking to here. So this is going to depend on, one of the things is the technical abilities of the court. How what are the capabilities of being able to, do we want to show this in a PowerPoint? Is it going to be a situation where the prosecutor is going to show up with a poster board that she's drawn all of this out on? Is it going to, what are your capabilities? One, if you are using something from a technical perspective, goodness sakes, please go test it beforehand. Make sure it's going to work for you when you're sitting there, if that's going to be a huge part of how you explain something or how they are visually going to see something. Oftentimes, what I was asked to do was to take a subset of what my digital report was. So what those, and most of the cases I worked were CSAM cases. Um,
Child sexual abuse
oh,
material for folks who are
thank you.
listening.
And I said internet, or ICAC earlier, internet crimes against children, those types of cases. So um, most of the time, I was asked to provide a subset of what the digital report represented, because the digital report oftentimes was going to have way more pictures or videos to know, or that's going to be included in that report. But then what's actually going to be presented in court is going to be a small amount of those.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever the prosecutor who would decide, hey, let's only use these 7. So then there have been times where I've created a PowerPoint of just those. There's been times if it was a video, I did a 3-second clip so they wouldn't have to sit there and watch 5 minutes of something horrible.
Yeah.
So it really is. We always say it depends. I'm sorry to say it again,
No,
but
it's good.
really you have to depend on the court's capabilities in terms of what's needed. The case, what does the case need? Is it going to be enough that they just see basically a written, printed out call log, and then you're going to explain how you arrived at the point of actually seeing that?
But for a call log, I would put it in chat bubbles so it looks more like a phone because that's more relatable. A
Sure.
lot of demonstratives I've had to deal with recently are for geolocation cases. So a lot of maps showing different points at different times, and trying to get visuals and demonstratives right for that. Maps are interesting because sometimes you have to do many slides to be able to show um, time lapse, right? Because somebody may have been here at 4 a.m. and then they're here at 4:02 and then they're here at 4:10 and then this other person's here at 4:20, and you're trying to show that relationship. So sometimes you almost want to be able to play a video of a map. There are tools that do that. Um, one of the ones that's got a free trial, it's kind of cool, is Lumix. But there's this whole concept of I've had to do a lot of map demonstratives recently that's mapping related. That's that's pretty common now. But I do a lot of tables too. I feel like a lot of tables, like you said, it's a subset of all of the data, just narrowing down to those artifacts. So I agree, and being able to use those is important. So we've talked about all of these demonstratives, all of these tips and tricks, all of these things. What do you think about, and we talked about going and observing court, what do you think is the importance of moot court or practice court?
That was one of the best experiences I had when it came to being able to be ready to testify, because the moot court that I went through was a very detailed.
Mm-hmm.
I had a mock case that was provided ahead of time, months ahead of time, that a senior examiner had just raked over the coals. I had two practicing attorneys that were on each side, that were grilling me, and in addition to, you had specific concepts or specific terms that you had to be able to explain very well on the stand. So I studied so hard to be able to get that exam to where I wanted it to be before I ever submitted it. And then on prior to getting ready for this to be on the stand, I studied so hard. But the good thing was that it wasn't quote real. So I got to focus on the um, the the facts and the way that
Right.
court goes. So that really helped to take that. I think
The
being able to
process.
anonymize it,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
being able to anonymize it helps, I think, a lot in a moot court. It helps you to focus on the details of it that are sometimes the part that's difficult to implement into the exam that you've already done.
One of the fun things is I teach at George Mason University, and in the capstone class for the master's program, there's of course a moot court. David Lovell runs that, fantastic gentleman, and he brings in attorneys, but sometimes he can't find enough attorneys to do the moot court sessions because of the number of students. So sometimes he lets those of us who are examiners, we get to play attorneys. So that's fun, but hard for me to prep for because it's not the way I normally think. But
Mhm.
it's all like cases I know from like CFREDs and reference data sets that we're all commonly familiar with. So it's kind of fun. It's definitely fun. And you do moot court in the class you teach, right,
We, oh,
Kim? Do
Kim.
do you do
University
like
class?
no
Yeah.
your Hexordia class, your expert
My
witness
Hexordia class,
class?
yes. Yes, we have a Hexordia class that's coming up soon. And yes, indeed, we've got a moot court portion of that. So it's going to be fun.
Yeah. Kim teaches our expert witness testimony class with Robert Peters, who's an attorney who's got a ton of experience, including as a prosecutor. And it's kind of neat that they built that class together. So that's kind of
You know,
fun.
it'll be interesting to talk with the first set of students that go through and see how much more comfortable
Yeah,
they are going to feel, and then even follow up with them after that, and see how much more comfortable it made them feel, because it's an element of preparation, right? Practicing.
100%. And it's not just moot court, right? That it's a whole class on expert witness testimony.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Yes. Yes. That's a portion of it, but it's a fun part of it that I think everybody will
I'm gonna take it. I'm
enjoy and learn.
excited. I'll learn a
You know,
lot.
I will say that I always enjoyed testifying in court. Now, I was not an expert witness, I was a fact witness, but I always enjoyed testifying in court because it was the culmination of a lot of work.
Hmm.
And I always viewed it as I got to tell the story of this investigation and the case, and either bring closure for victims or their family, or and also bring justice to that particular scenario, and put a bad guy in jail, hopefully.
I
So I always viewed it as I got to tell the story of what occurred.
it carries, and I know I keep using this term. It's a really weird term, but it carries so much weight and importance
It does.
that I think it is an important part of the process. I'm not going to say I like it. I'm not going to say I dislike it. I
Oh, I love it.
recognize it. I recognize it as an important part of the process. I get nervous before I go on, but I think that just means that I care. I think it's normal
Absolutely.
to be
Hmm.
nervous. But the second they, like I said, I get nervous on my name. But the second they start asking me about my CV and about the case, Those are all things I know, so I'm comfortable with it, right? They're not going to ask you something you
You
don't
don't
know.
know
And
your
if they,
name.
and I swear that's what I always get nervous about messing up. I'm like afraid I'm like going to say my maiden name or something. I've been married 20 years. It's not like I got married last week.
This is
My last
funny.
name's been Hyde for over 20 years. But I'm just always nervous that I'm going to misspell my name. But then once I get past that, once you're up there, like you're just talking about the work you did. I know what I
Right.
did. But that's no different than when I go speak at a conference, right? When I go talk at a conference, there are butterflies in my stomach. I'm doing the same thing. I'm preparing all morning. I'm at my desk at 4 a.m. preparing just like I am reading my report at 4 a.m. before going to court. It's a very, very similar process to me. I'm nervous until I start. I'm nervous for like the first two words. You'll hear my voice crack. And then once I start going, I'm fine. And that's I so it's really preparation wise, it's very, very, very similar to speaking. Anybody who's done public speaking, it's a very, very similar experience.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And again, it's just repetition. It's being able to, do the do no, the more exams you do, the more comfortable you are with, what
Talking about
process
them and
you went through.
explaining it.
Yeah, and explaining it to folks. And then also, it's the big thing is to just don't let the unexpected throw you off, because there's going to be something expected, because you are not the one who has sat there prior to you giving your testimony. So you don't know what's just occurred. You don't know what you're walking into, as they say. So, you don't know what's occurred. So you just have to expect the unexpected. Or if you're in a state like I am, we've got 120 counties here in this fairly small state, average size state in the US. So, there's numerous different courts that are here doing everything different ways. That's why I always love testifying in federal court. It was a little bit more streamlined. But still, it was always a good learning experience, no matter where it was.
I
So
love
take
that.
with it what you can.
I think that's a great point to end on. Expect the unexpected. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time on Truth and Data. Bye.
Bye.